Well, we do have one more panelist who is trying to connect, but I think in the interest of everyone's time, I think it would be a good idea to go ahead and get started. Elliott, what do you think?
I think, let's see, 5 past. I think that's maybe a good idea, Necia, and hopefully he'll be able to join us soon.
Yeah. So, well, first, I would like to welcome everybody and thank everyone for being here at today's Roundtable on Academic Book Publishing in German Studies, sponsored by the AATG. I am Necia Chronister, and my co-MC today will be Elliott. Elliott, do you want to say hi?
Hi.
We are book review editors at the German Quarterly, and we will be moderating today's event. Before introducing our panelists, however, we would like to extend our thanks to the German Quarterly editors, Hester Baer and Karen Schütter, for supporting us in organizing this roundtable, and to the AATG, especially Executive Director Michael Shaughnessy, who is here helping run things behind the scenes, and the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator, Evan Worthing, who we've been in contact with for the organization of this roundtable. We'd like to thank them both very much for kindly hosting.
Absolutely. As many of you might know, over the past 2 years, the GQ editorial team has organized a series of roundtable discussions on topics including the craft of writing book reviews, writing and responding to peer review articles, and most recently, challenges facing our field and potential solutions. And please do stay tuned for the announcement of a second roundtable on this last topic organized by Hester and Karen. And as you are probably aware, we're recording today's event so that anyone who isn't able to be here today can view it at a later date, and we'll make the link to the recording available to everybody.
One key aim of these forums has been to open up the process of scholarly publication as much as possible for both seasoned and early career scholars. And today we'd like to extend that aim beyond the writing of journal articles and book reviews to include book publication. As book review editors, Ellie and I try very hard to stay on top of the books that are appearing in our discipline. And I think we can both say with a lot of confidence that there is so much good content coming out right now. And it's sometimes hard to keep up with everything that's coming out. It has been especially hard for us to pick just a handful of publishers to invite as panelists to this roundtable. Our intention has been to be as representative as possible while keeping it a manageable group. And that said, we are delighted that the 5 panelists that we invited accepted our invitation without hesitation.
And what we're going to do so that you don't just hear a block of text from Necia and me at the outset is we're going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves and their presses. And then our format today is we're going to pose a few questions for the panelists that we've prepared in advance. And we would ask all of you in the audience, please keep yourself muted throughout today's event, since we do have a good number of folks on the call. And but we do want active participation from you. So we encourage you to post any questions that you might have for the panelists in the chat, and we'll reserve time at the end of our forum to give the panelists a chance to respond to your questions. So without further ado, I am going to pass things over in alphabetical order. We're going to start with Myrto.
Yeah, thank you so much, both Necia and Elliott, for inviting me. Mine is, I think, a rather unusual path, but maybe it isn't as unusual as I think. I joined de Gruyter pretty much straight after my PhD. I threw myself in at the deep end of publishing. So I finished my PhD in German studies, and I was itching to try something new. And a parental leave cover position opened up in exactly my field at de Gruyter. And then I was lucky enough to be able to stay on. And I now manage about 20 book series, including 2 long-standing German studies series, Interdisciplinary German Cultural Studies, which is edited by Imke, and Paradigms by Rudiger Kamper and Karen Feldman, and formerly Paul Fleming, who I believe is next alphabetically.
Great, should I go?
Sounds good.
Yep. So yeah, thank you, Myrto. Thank you, Elliott. Thank you, Necia. I'm really delighted that you guys organized this. I think it's a really wonderful idea, and glad we're doing this. So I'm Paul Fleming. I'm in German and comparative literature at Cornell University. I realized that I've been doing editing for quite some time. I did Manhattan manuscripts while I was still at NYU as a professor from 2009 to 2012 or 2015. I did that. Then I started Paradigms with Rudiger Kamper at the Gruyter and did that for 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. And now I have overtaken the Signale series at Cornell from Peter-Uwe Hohendahl, which has now been around for almost, I believe, 20 years, 15, 20 years. And we do scholarly monographs, we do translations, and we're starting a small book series as well that I'd love to talk about today. So we do the entire palette of German studies, and I'm really excited to learn from and hear from our colleagues with other book series.
Beautiful. And Imke Meyer, you're next up.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm based at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I edit the New Directions in German Studies series for Bloomsbury. And this series really came into being because I was talking with a few colleagues and we said, well, this was at the time, and things have changed somewhat in the meantime, not that many series out there anymore. There were series that had folded in German studies. Shouldn't there be another outlet? And so I decided to approach somebody at Bloomsbury who I knew had been the acquisitions editor for another German studies book that came out outside of any specific series, and said, hey, you know, this is such a great book, and how about a whole series? And then I had like a phone call, like a conference call with some people at Bloomsbury, and they eventually, after we turned in proposals and sort of predicted how many manuscripts we would be getting, and they calculated the financial end. They said, okay, let's try this. And we launched this New Directions in German Studies series. And we've been fortunate to be able to put out on average about 3 books per year for the past almost 15 years now. A lot of changes have happened over time, but it's a wonderful thing that I get to do here with Bloomsbury and with the authors and edited volume colleagues who come to the series, and yeah, it's great.
Beautiful. And next up is Laurel Plapp from Peter Lund.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for organizing this, Necia and Elliott. So I'm the senior acquisitions editor for the language, literature, and culture list at Peter Lang Oxford. And I've been with the company now for nearly 14 years. And I acquire books across all modern languages. And I have, special dedicated series in German studies, but also comparative series like Imagining Black Europe. And we're also really active in supporting early career researchers with competitions like the Women in German Studies Book Prize, which Peter Lang sponsors every year. I got my start in publishing in New York City right after college, and then went back and did a PhD in comparative literature in German and French. And I did end up publishing my dissertation as a book. So for those of you who are at that stage, I've been at that stage. So I really welcome these opportunities to help demystify the publishing process. So thank you everyone for being here, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Excellent. And we do indeed have our 5th panelist, Jim Walker. Jim, do you want to do a brief introduction of yourself and of Camden House?
Yes. Sorry for my tardiness. I got hit with some internet problems right when I was trying to get on with you guys at 2:50. But anyway, yeah. So I've been with Camden House for almost 30 years now. Started in 1994. And let's see. Yeah, I started on August 28th, 1994, which Jim Harden, the founder of Camden House, always reminded me that's Gruyter's birthday. So that was a good omen, I guess. Camden House had been founded around 1980 by two professors at the University of South Carolina, where I studied, and Jim Harden and Gunther Holst. Jim Harden ran the business, and having graduated with a master's in teaching German that summer, and not having found a teaching position, I signed on for a so-called temporary stopgap employment, working part-time, doing clerical duties, and worked for Jim Harden for 4 years until the UK-based independent academic publisher Boydell and Brewer purchased us. They had been doing our overseas distribution for several years, and so I became an employee of Boydell and Brewer, and Camden House became an imprint of Boydell and Brewer at that point in '98. And so over the next 6 or 8 years, I kind of gradually took over the editorial and acquisitions duties from Jim Harden, who retired, and been doing that ever since. Yeah, and Camden House, as you may know, we publish across German studies, literature, cultural studies, history, film. Also, we do have a small list in American lit studies as well, but it's mostly German studies. Yeah, that's about it.
Great. Thank you again all so much for being here and for lending your insights and your expertise. I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of people. We're going to start off just by asking kind of about the current state of things. How have you seen academic book publishing change in the last 10 to 15 years? What are some challenges, trends, especially for the humanities disciplines, and how has the industry been adapting?
I think I'm starting, am I?
Sure.
So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about open access, because I think that's obviously a really, really important aspect of academic publishing today. There's increasing interest in it from scholars, but also a lot of funding bodies are requiring it. Some national contexts are requiring it. And we really need to ensure that modern languages scholars have access to the funding and support they need to be able to publish open access. At Peter Lang, we're always working to aid scholars in finding funding for open access, but the problem is that some people do miss out on these opportunities, and I think often early career researchers and scholars from the Global South don't have that access. So publishers are experimenting with different kinds of models, some of those being collective funding models, which is a collaboration between the university library and the publisher to fund open access publishing. So in that case, the library is not just purchasing a book, but they're actually contributing towards releasing the book for free to all. So I think this is one way we can all work together to make open access more accessible.
Myrto, did you want to jump in here with anything?
I wanted to say something about the publishing formats that I've seen in demand lately, and there's more and more people interested in shorter volumes that intervene in ongoing public debates, more introductory volumes, edited volumes that combine more traditional contributions with more essayistic pieces, original artworks, interviews, and so on. And this kind of hybrid edited volume can be quite exciting to make, I think. But we also need to make sure we stay realistic about these types of books not being trade titles. They're not really addressing a broader audience. but they're still, it's a freeing up of the format, if you will. That's one of the trends I've observed.
If I can jump in on that, I mean, that's one of the reasons why with Signale that we're starting a small book format within the program of Signale, precisely to respond to that desire for these more kind of shorter, addressing urgency, quicker turnaround time. So these are, you know, rather than the 80 to 120,000 word, these are in the 30 to 50,000 word range, and should be more driven by the big idea than marshaling the ton of academic evidence. So it's a slight different way of writing, but there's a real desire of authors to have these other formats for writing, also more essayistic writing than the scholarly writing, less of the heavy footnoting. So we're responding to that. And I think, you know, the other thing that I've seen change, which you know, Imke was mentioned already, is that in the last 25 years, there was a point where a bunch of German series folded. And when I was coming out and trying to get my dissertation out, there was very little other than Peter Lang and Camden House. That was kind of it. And now there's actually, with the Gruyter having 2 series, with Imke's series, with the Signale series through Cornell, there's actually quite, at Northwestern, there's quite a bit, there's a rich diversity of possibilities. I think it's actually a good time to be publishing in German studies compared to 20 years ago. And there's a lot of different exciting avenues for getting your work out there. And I think that's a positive thing to think about at this juncture. One has options.
Yeah, I would completely echo what the other panelists, what my colleagues have said. And what I can observe too is that edited volumes in general are becoming more popular. It used to be that many publishers sort of looked askance at edited volumes. And that has really changed because, as you can see, the MLA even now has an edited volume prize, and they've been giving that out, I forget, for a couple of years maybe. And these edited volumes give the chance also to showcase a diversity of voices, and as you pointed out, Myrto, different formats can be used, interviews, even some autobiographical pieces and so forth. And there is an audience for that. And so far, libraries seem to be going for that, especially if you can have a spread of early career scholars and then some more advanced people whose names maybe library acquisitions people will recognize. And that helps, of course, everybody because they get the attention if the book is purchased by a library. And the format of publishing has been changing a little bit also in response to ebooks. We have been structuring our chapters differently, because when you order a chapter from a book, either via interlibrary loan or you download something from an ebook, it's not always formatted in such a way that you get the endnotes. So we've been using footnotes, and we also have, if it's an edited volume, been recommending to people that they put their bibliographies at the end of each essay, so that if you order via interlibrary loan or download from an ebook just one chapter, you have all the information that a scholar should really want. So yeah.
Jim, did you want to add anything?
Well, just let's see. To do with ebooks and print on demand, I guess. Ebooks going back 15 or 20 years were, at least for us, were a little scary and a little threatening, because we didn't know how the business model was going to work. But both they and the print on demand model for printing books is both of them are very helpful to us at this point. So print on demand, I don't know that we or other small publishers could really be viable without it. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. Thank you all for that. I mean, as Necia mentioned, for us as book review editors, we do feel it's a really exciting time. There's some really interesting new developments, both in terms of research fields, but also in terms of ways that that books are getting published today. And certainly the diversity of presses represented here is indicative of that as well. Necia and I were very curious, especially for first-time authors, if you could tell us a little bit, demystify maybe a little bit the process of publishing a book, which can be a little bit opaque. Would you be so kind as to walk us through the process? What is the chain of contacts an author would have from proposing a book manuscript through to editing and final production and marketing? Or if you want to start at any point in that chain there, I'll let you guys respond however you want.
I can take the lead, and then since it's going to be different for different presses, I think it's really important that the people hear the different possibilities out there. I think the most important thing to consider right now, particularly if you are not yet tenured stream, is to reverse engineer the process, thinking about what do your colleagues, what does your school expect you to have when you submit your dossier for tenure? If it is the book as a real object, if it's the contract, if it's a galley, and then reverse engineer that. Because the process, at least for a university press such as Cornell, it takes a while. I mean, the full process, if all goes well, from the initial submission to the book coming out, we're talking, when things go well, 1.5 years. When things, if you have trouble at one press and need to go to another press, you're talking a 2-year span. So I really think it's important. My biggest advice is be in touch with us, with the series editors, with managing editors early. You do not have to have everything ready to go. You can simply send an email expressing your interest in giving a 1-page précis of what the project is, just to get on our radars, to begin an iterative process that will also, it will help your manuscript, whether you go with one of us or a different press. So I think the first thing is establish contact early before you have all of them. Don't have everything set. Ask about what they want, and what some want the full manuscript, some just want the prospectus, some want the prospectus with the sample. So we want the prospectus potentially first, or perspective with the introduction and 1-chapter sample. We review that. On the basis of that, then we ask for the full manuscript. On the basis of that, then we'll send it out. And so I think it's important to be in touch with the presses, review their lists, but also lists don't necessarily represent everything that a press or a series would like to do. So sometimes if you're interested in the series, you can also ask, like, hey, would you be interested in this? It's a very easy email to write, and you'll get good feedback one way or another about that. So I'd say my main advice is be in touch early. Don't feel you need to have everything set, and begin an iterative process of discussion with the series editor of getting things out.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, go on.
I would completely second that. I also would advise people to approach us early, and as you said, Paul, maybe with a 1-page précis, or even with a question, is topic X potentially of interest to you? And then at that point, sometimes one can already say, oh, well, actually, there's a visual culture, German studies and visual culture at Bloomsbury, maybe send it there. Or this is actually something that would fit very well with the Bucknell series in Studies in the Age of Goethe, these types of things. So you can sometimes advise people that they might be better served thematically because of their topic elsewhere. And we really, as everybody emphasized, are trying to sort of demystify this process of obtaining a book contract. So it's always good to reach out. Nobody will feel annoyed if you send them a quick email and just check in, say, what about this topic? Or if you just send a précis. And I would almost advise people, don't just download from the publisher's website some generic proposal form and fill it out. I, for instance, have a modified proposal form that I like to share with prospective authors. They can fill that out, and they can also even ask me, hey, do you have time to meet via Zoom? And I can advise them on what such a proposal ought to look like. And we, of course, also, if we think a project has potential, provide feedback and say, well, maybe think about X, Y, and Z, and then send the proposal again, and we can see where we take this. But people are eager to work with you because people are eager to put out exciting book manuscripts and good projects.
If I could just say one small thing in the same direction, and you both mentioned this in different words, but I just wanted to spell it out again. There are another trend. I was actually thinking about this when we were talking about trends and changes over the past few years. Another trend is to have more interdisciplinary series. So don't be put off by, if you see that a publisher has one or two kind of decidedly German studies series, that doesn't mean that your topic won't fit. I think I speak for all of us when I say we have increasingly many interdisciplinary series that might actually be a better fit and a better community for you to publish your manuscript in than a kind of traditional old school German studies series. So this is just something to look out for. And you won't know this until you write to an acquisitions editor.
One thing I might just say in terms of slight differences, maybe that for me as an acquisitions editor, I'm often the person who is guiding my authors through the entire process. I remain as the kind of the point of contact through the process. So authors can reach out to me to begin with, and then I guide them through the process of the peer review and the revision process and through to publication. And we really encourage you to communicate with us and stay in contact with us. It's often the case as you get further down the line, maybe it's going to take you a bit longer to finish writing your manuscript. That's absolutely fine. Just keep us in the loop and communicate with us. So that kind of communication, open communication, we really welcome that.
Thank you all for helping clarify that. Kind of the starting point is the acquisition editors, the people that one would email. Just kind of a question about pitching a project. You've kind of touched on it already, but how's the best way for an author to approach you? Should they send an email? Should they visit you at a conference? What are the differences in approach if they do it one or the other way?
Yeah, I mean, we really encourage you to come and meet with us at conferences. We're all at the GSA at our book stand. So come and talk to us, come and speak with us about your projects. This is, a venue like this is actually a really great way to learn about all the different options that you have for publishing. We also, recommend talking to your supervisor if you're finishing your PhD or your colleagues. About where they're publishing, what publishers they recommend, and also looking at what the books are that you're reading and the series that you're reading. That's a really good source of information as well about choosing the publisher. And when you found a publisher that you're interested in, you're welcome to send an email to the acquisitions editor or the series editor and just lay out, as they've been saying, lay out in a couple of paragraphs what your project is about, what kind of contribution you're making to the field, what series that publisher publishes that they'd be interested in potentially. And the editor is going to write to you and tell you exactly what they want to see. And usually that will be a prospectus with some sample material. Some cases they might ask for the full manuscript if it's available, but you'll just want to send what it is that they request. And as Paul was saying, reaching out early on in the process, you're welcome to start that conversation, even when you're it's just an early stage, just beginning that conversation with us.
Great. And a quick follow-up question. What information or material should an author have at their fingertips before reaching out to an editor or rep? Is there a certain amount of the book that should be finished? The whole thing? I think you guys have addressed this to some extent, but if anybody would care to comment any more on that.
I would like to comment on that because I think, for me personally, I think it's a mistake to wait until the full manuscript is done. Again, I can't iterate enough what everyone's saying, contact us early, because partly is also that way you're in the system, we're already in dialogue, so that when you then come later and say, now I have the proposal, I'm expecting it. It's like the contact's already started, the conversation's already started. And I think that just makes, that expedites everything by starting that conversation early. So meet us at the GSA, email us, be in our system. And then I don't think you can begin the conversation pretty much as soon as you have a very good sense of what your project is, even if your dissertation's done and you haven't started revising it, but say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. Because we can also guide you as to whether we think that other chapter that you're thinking about is a good idea, and whether in that format it would be a good fit for our series, or whether, as Imke says, we want the field of German studies to thrive. So if you don't go with Signale, sure, we'd love to have great books, but I just want to see German studies do well, and I want to see the other series do well. That's my main interest. That's why we're doing this. And so the more that we can help each other to help the field is a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. This is why we are doing this. We feel we can maybe help support people at all stages of their career, do something for the field, make sure that interesting and exciting research really sees the light of day and gets a good distribution. And I would also echo what you said, Laurel. Really approach people at conferences and articulate what your intervention would be, or as Paul put it, what your idea is, and just say, is this something that would fly in the context of your series? Tell me more about it, and meet with several editors. Don't think that once you've talked to one person, you are basically committed to them. Auf Wohl und Gedeih, of Wohl und Wehe. It's not like that, right? I mean, just talk to several people and even see, okay, where might my work fit the best? What is the timeline, as Paul stressed earlier? That could be really important for you if you're an early career scholar. Yeah.
Fantastic. One thing that might not be clear to early career scholars or to first-time authors is what is actually included in the prospectus. So could you maybe talk about what one might expect to include in that document and how that might differ from publisher to publisher?
Yes, this is Jim. We do have a standard proposal form, which I generally do like people to use. It's not a must for sure, and I agree with everyone who's said, there's no time that's too early to get in touch with me. Having said that, most projects, or most work that I do with authors on a project, starts with a proposal form, and ours is a fairly short form that asks for just basic information, contact information, your professional standing, your affiliation, other books if you've written. Précis on the book is the real key thing there, and table of contents if possible, and then just basic facts about the book as much as you can nail them down, like the word count, whether there are any illustrations, any other special features, special requirements, things like that, and then what is your estimated time of completion for it, and that just gives again, it's not a must to start that way, but it's usually a good way to start. And then I also like if it's available to get more, in addition to that proposal form, what I see is a prospectus, which is more of a little bit more in-depth document that would have maybe 2 to 3 pages about the project, detailing it a little bit more, setting out the significance of it to a greater detail than you can do in 225 word précis. And then also probably, if possible, chapter abstracts, not, abstract, not too long. Maybe a prospectus of about 5 to 7 pages, something like that on average. Could be longer, depending on the book. Sometimes for a collected volume it would be, and that's kind of the ideal for me. The prospectus can, I think, be prepared in a way that can be used for multiple publishers if you do end up talking to multiple publishers, and kind of can be a set form of your own choosing, whereas the proposal form that the publisher has is going to be set up according to their wants or needs. So those two together usually make a good package.
Great, thank you, Jim. And maybe picking up on your last point, a question that Necia and I were hoping to ask you as well is it okay to submit to multiple publishers at the same time?
That's a good question, and there is some etiquette surrounding that. Fundamentally, it's okay to submit proposals to multiple publishers at the same time, but it's very much appreciated if you're transparent about that. Some publishers peer review proposals, other publishers peer review manuscripts. They will obviously review your proposal. This also differs within different publishers, different subject areas. So in some subject areas at Gruyter, we peer review proposals. In others, we review proposals, invite people to peer review, and then submit the full manuscript to peer review. It's okay to submit proposals to multiple publishers at the same time. It's definitely not okay to submit manuscripts to different publishers at the same time. The reason being that once you've submitted your manuscript to peer review, you need to commit to a publisher. The peer review is a painful process for everyone involved. It's costly, it's time consuming, it's resource intensive, and the least you can do is just be honest about your intentions. And there's also some etiquette as regards timing, and when you communicate what publishers. If you submit your proposal to a publisher, you can expect to hear within a week or two, at least get some kind of confirmation that they have received your email or the proposal form. If you don't, then I think after a month you'd be justified in submitting to a different publisher. This is a little bit different when we're talking about the full manuscript. If your full manuscript is already under review and you've been waiting for 4 months and nothing has happened, then I think you can write a gentle reminder to your editor and say, this has been going on for a while. Do we have any news? If they're not responsive for whatever reason within a week or two, and there's no out of office message, then you can withdraw. You just need to tell them about it. You just need to tell them that you're pursuing publication elsewhere.
I can just piggyback on one point of that brilliant comment, is that particularly if you are up for tenure, be very open that I'm under tenure deadline, because we can't do everything, but we can expedite things, and we can make the big problem that Myrto brought up, what's really difficult right now post-pandemic is finding reviewers. Reviewers it's become a very, very difficult to find people to do it and then find people who will turn it around in time. It's just, and this is across all journals,
Absolutely.
everybody I know. And so that's why the double submissions, it's ethically never been good, but at this particular moment in time, when reviewers' time is so precious, we can't waste that goodwill. It's just not good for anybody. But be upfront about what your timeline is. And there's nothing wrong, particularly, I mean, I can speak because we have a managing editor, Kaiser Walker, who's brilliant, but like it's me and Kaiser running the series. I'm also a professor and I have a journal. And so it's nothing wrong with sending me an email saying, I want to bump this back up in your box. Hey, could you give me a response? I do not only do I not mind, I greatly appreciate that. So again, keep the lines of communication open. It's no problem to be like, hey, I kind of would like a response. Can you give me an update? No problem. And the thing about what Jim was saying about the perspectives, the one thing to remember with the perspectives is that document accompanies everything you send along every step of the way. And that's the first thing that everybody's going to read. That's what the board's going to read, what the external reviewer is going to read, what the university board is going to read. So it's just important that that one, you really stand behind that and put time into the perspectives, because that will be the one thing that everybody reads for sure as the first thing.
Thank you all so much. We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to hear a bit more about how to choose publishers to approach. How do you know when something is going to be a good fit or not?
Well, I would say you know it by reaching out to people and communicating with them. And of course, what you should also do is you should look at the lists in which you are interested. You should look at the publishers that you are interested in. Just look at what sorts of volumes have appeared there, whether it's even your subject area, because if it's completely outside your subject area, then chances are, if it's a specific series, it might not fit. However, you could still reach out to an acquisitions editor or a series editor and say, I'm thinking this probably doesn't fit with you. Am I right about it? And if so, would you be able to point me in another direction? Yeah, but I mean, just communicate. That's really key, rather than trying to divine it from I have gotten a response, I have not gotten a response, the website looks like this or that. Just, follow up, as Paul said, make sure that your name appears at the top of the inbox again, or approach people at conferences if you haven't had any contact with them yet. Yeah, just communicate.
If I can just reiterate one point that Imke said, I think it's really important. Just because a list has looked a certain way does not mean that that's the way the list wants to remain. Also, because there's change of editors, there's change of things, the field changes. And so if the series interests you, even if it looks like, as Imke said, just write and say, hey, I'm working on this that you haven't traditionally done, but would this be interesting? There's a good chance that we will say, yes, it would be, or no, but look at the Gruyter, look at Imke's series, look at Peter Lang, look at Camden House. In other words, we will help guide you somewhere else as well, but there's a good chance that we would be interested as well. And it's hard, if we don't get the manuscripts, we can't change the types of books we're doing. I want to be proactive, I'm trying to be proactive, but there's also limitations to that. So just if you're interested, reach out. And just very quickly to Mary's in the chat, you do not need the prospectus. A very brief email where you can just like one paragraph suffice. Conversation does not have to begin with the prospectus. Contact us early and contact us in a way that you're not making a big commitment of your own time and resources, but really just getting a lay of the land.
That said, I got an email today saying, hi, this is my name. Can you publish my PhD dissertation as a book? And that wasn't very helpful. I had to write several emails to this person saying, okay, can you please tell me what your book is about? Can you please tell me the title? So a brief email without a prospectus is perfectly fine, but maybe just mention the vague direction in which your book is going.
You are correct.
Okay, good advice. So what other common mistakes do you see with first-time book authors, and what suggestions do you have for them? Laurel, do you want to maybe kick us off on this one?
I was thinking in terms of the dissertation to book transition, and just how it's important when you're starting to think about publishing to really think about the difference in the audience that you'll have. So for your dissertation, you have this sort of small audience of your supervisor, your examiners, your committee, and the book is going to be reaching out to a broader audience, but still an academic audience, and conveying something new and interesting to this audience. And in one of the books that's recommended in the book list, Beth Louie talks about creating a sort of concentric circle model to develop that audience. So thinking in terms of that sort of small circle is for the dissertation, and then you start to kind of think about what these larger circles of your potential audience might be, such as maybe other scholars who are working on authors of the same period that you're working on, maybe people who are interested in the historical context and so on. And then once you've kind of mapped that out, you can ask questions about that audience, like what does this broader audience not need to know that I can remove from the manuscript? So things like the literature review, the detailed footnotes, and what might you need to explain to them, such as offering more context for those readers. So this is kind of just a good starting point for starting to think about the revisions that need to be made in developing that prospectus.
Yeah, and I would say what is no obstacle, and I see this question here in the chat from Alarm, is if you've published an article or two based on the dissertation, because usually an article is shaped differently from the way a book chapter is anyway. A book chapter is part of a larger argumentative arc, a larger narrative that you are making about whatever scholarly intervention you are engaged in. So, and along those lines, one sort of common issue that I have sometimes when I get books that are based on dissertations is that it takes one sort of basic argument and then doesn't unfold that argument sort of like patiently over a number of different chapters, but rather repeats that same argument. And here's another case study, and here's why that argument works in case A, in case B, in case C. It makes for a very boring book. And it's probably not actually the kind of book you would want to read if you were reading a book. It might have served a purpose as a dissertation, but as a book, really give yourself the freedom to unfold an argument. And that's why a book is a book and can't just be an article. So if you publish a couple of articles that are linked to the book material or even based on the material in a couple of chapters, that doesn't matter, because in a book der Zusammenhang should be ein anderer. Der Zusammenhang ist ein anderer, and you are building really a much broader structure, an argument that people do want to follow from chapter to chapter.
I can pick up on that, which is a related topic, is generally the big advice people give for the dissertation to the book is the tendency in the dissertation is to want to save the good stuff for the end of the chapter. Like I've had the big reveal on page 30, like, and now, and basically what you do is you take all that good stuff, put it in the introduction, make the big reveal early, and rewrite it according to putting the big thesis out there so that the reader knows right away what's at stake. It actually makes it a much more efficient and interesting argument, because it's not like I'm trying to hide something and you've already said it, and now you develop it a lot differently. And I think that's one way what Imke is getting at is like getting away from the article idea to the book idea, is having that and then using that as in dialogue with each other. I actually find writing a book has huge advantages over the article, because you can pick up on ideas from previous chapter and not say, here it is again, but look how it develops here. This is a different case and different things are happening. And to use the chapters as friction against one another. The one other thing I would say, which I've changed a lot on my own advising for students, I used to say wait 2 years before worried about the publishing process. Because it now takes so much longer and you don't want to get mired in the dissertation, I would say pretty much start as soon as you have a chance. When you finish it, take a little bit of time off, but get back into rewriting it and turn it into a book sooner rather than later.
I think that's very good advice. And I've also, I keep telling people, a dissertation starts with a question, a book starts with the answer. You need to give your argument away. It shouldn't be the twist in your plot. It should be, like you said, Paul, it should be right there from the beginning. And another frequent mistake that I think some first-time authors make is that they don't really consider the match between their audience and their arguments. They tend to overestimate their readership. In a lot of proposals I read, there's usually a section about the target audience, and a lot of people say, they're writing for scholars in German studies, visual culture, memory studies, and so on, and for the interested general reader. And that's almost never the case. Knowing who you're writing for is going to help you write this book. So you need to show that you have a sense of the context of the book, who is likely to be interested in this, beyond your dissertation committee. And another thing that's related to this is that first-time authors tend to insist that the particular text that they've been working on have never been looked at from the specific angle that they've chosen before, or in exactly this combination before, and that is relevant to a PhD. Obviously, PhDs should technically be an original contribution to knowledge, but it's not helpful in a publishing context. So if there are no related titles, if there are no other authors working on similar topics, then who's going to want to read your book in the first place? This is something to consider. And it kind of circles back to what Laurel was talking about, the concentric circles of readers. That's a very helpful way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that our panelists have compiled some resources for everyone that we've linked to in the chat, and several of those resources have to do with going from dissertation to book. So we really, really appreciate those contributions. We wanted to also ask, what is expected of authors beyond producing content? So they've written the book and they've handed it over to you, and like, are they done, or what happens next? What are authors responsible for?
So authors are responsible for providing a clean copy in a final manuscript. They're not responsible at most presses for copy editing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't get it as close to perfect as possible. They're also at Camden House anyway, and most presses responsible for the index, which we can guide you to some professional indexers who can do a great job, but they're not cheap. But most authors do their own indexes. We have a short guide that helps, and it's a labor-intensive task, but actually can be done really well by an author. You know your book better than anyone. We also need you. Our marketing department needs you to fill out what we call a marketing brief, which is colleagues and societies and any other entities that should be informed about your book, and other questions on it. That's very important that you fill that out thoroughly. Rights and permissions for the use of images or any text that that goes beyond fair use is needed. I wanted to say something going back to the last group of questions. Also, when we talk about the audience, once you have determined what your audience is or what your audiences are, Laurel's concentric circles is a really good way to look at it. It's important that you spend a lot of effort actually conforming your text to that audience. And to me, it's even in kind of small scale things, like I'll often get someone who mentions a figure, say a critic or a scholar of some type, on the first page of their introduction, and they don't gloss that person. They don't explain who that is or give any other information. Fine, that might be okay. It would lead me to believe that their audience is gauged as including only people who are going to know who that is, if it's important who that is. But then on page 5, they might mention the person again and give a gloss or an explanation, and that's where I find it, they're not really hewing to a coherent idea of what their audience is, who their audience is, and being consistent with that. So I always like to advise people there's always exceptions. Sometimes it just doesn't work to get a gloss in at the first mention, but usually it will, and it should be done that way. And just in a broader way, I think as the successive drafts go on, especially, you want to really hone in on making sure that you're giving your intended audience or audiences, let's say the least knowledgeable ones, enough information to follow, and hopefully in a way that won't alienate the more expert members of your audience. It's a tough kind of needle to thread, but you really the more attention you can give to that sort of thing, the better.
Great advice. Necia and I only have 2 more questions of our own left. So once again, we'd encourage anybody on this call to post their questions to the chat, and we'll leave some time for your questions, any remaining questions. The next question that I'd like to ask, just very briefly, let's say that you've gone through the process that all of you have discussed, and your manuscript has gone through peer review, and you're lucky enough to get a contract. Is there anything that the author should be paying attention to as they read through the legalese of the contract?
Well, they of course will want to figure out whether there's a manuscript length agreed upon. That's very important. And then once you deliver the manuscript, the cleaned up copy edited version of the manuscript, or the cleaned up pre-copy edited version of the manuscript, which then goes into copy edit, you can't have 150,000 words if the uppermost limit the contract spells out is 120,000. And the reason is that the longer the book is, the more expensive it's going to be. With our books, for instance, they usually come first out in hardback, and these hardbacks are usually more than $100, are purchased by libraries primarily, and then 18 months later a paperback follows, but the ebook is also available from the get-go, and the paperback is usually $34.95, something thereabouts. And if you exceed your word limit and the book becomes excessively long, the publisher will either demur and will ask you to cut the manuscript, and it will throw off the production line, which is also an issue. I mean, during the pandemic, for instance, we started at Bloomsbury to have issues with supply lines for paper. So we needed to adhere to a very well-planned production schedule in order to sort of slot our books in when we could expect that there would be paper, right? So, I mean, in other words, I'm going on and on here, but in other words, it's important to look, okay, what did we actually agree upon in terms of the manuscript length, and stick to that. And then another thing is, of course, the margins in publishing, even for a non-academic publishing house such as Bloomsbury, and Bloomsbury Academic, where our series appears, is the imprint. The margins are so slim with these academic books, the margins of profit. You won't get rich publishing your academic book. You'll maybe get once a year a check that allows you to invite your friends to a pizza or something. It's really not anything that will make or break you financially. Your index is going to cost you more if you have it done by somebody than the amount of money you ever make on your academic book. Yeah, and then of course ask or look for in the contract things that Jim has already mentioned. Marketing, where is the book going to be distributed? How many copies are going to be printed up front in hardback, later on in paperback, ebook? If it's worldwide distribution, you need to know this, because then when you get your rights, the rights are going to be more expensive, but you don't want to hamper the distribution of your book by trying to, I don't know, save $50 on rights by not getting the worldwide rights for a painting or something else that you want in there. So negotiate the number of images that you can have in the book, and so forth. And I'm sure I'm forgetting many things, but
super helpful nuts and bolts.
If I could just say something, that you can absolutely negotiate the number of images. It won't be a very hard negotiation so long as you can get permission to use the images you want to include. You're unlikely to be able to negotiate the print run. This is just something to bear in mind. So the print run, the pricing, these are set by the publisher based on a cost calculation for your book, which in turn is based on the manuscript specifications that you provide, most likely in your proposal or longer prospectus. There are some negotiable bits of contracts, but they're not very many, unfortunately. It's still a very important document, and it's a big moment when you have a publisher's contract. But yeah, just in terms of what you can expect to have a say in.
I can jump on that. I think it's really important, therefore, that when you send in the prospectus and give a sense of what the word count is, that be relatively accurate. Because then when you deliver the final manuscript and it's 20,000, 30,000 words more, you start entering these problems like, oh, we weren't expecting that. It's not going with our price calculation. So to have a good sense of what the manuscript's going to be as far as length. And then I do think, that's part of the research of press, is then to consider what type of book do you want to appear at what point in time? Do you want to be able to come out as a paperback right away? Is a hard copy with the paperback in a year fine? At what point should it be available as an EPUB version? At what point as an open access? Those are things I think that are really important to take in consideration in this process. Yeah.
Thank you all. That's all really, really helpful. So the last question that we wanted to ask is about dealing with feedback what advice do you have for authors responding to peer reviewers?
I can kick that off. I mean, I think the main thing is to take the reviews really seriously. Particularly the so-called reviewer 2, the one that's the little bit nastier, that's the one you really want to take seriously and to truly engage them, which means don't be dismissive, don't feel wounded. Often you can turn, I mean, the amazing thing is you can turn a very tough review to your great advantage. If you respond to it in a way that says, I am listening, I hear that, this is really helpful, this is how I'm going to respond to that and change the manuscript, often using one reviewer both to supplement and also to help your argument. But the one thing I would also say is, so take it seriously. I've actually sent reviews, the response reviews back saying, you need to actually do more work here. This will not go by the board because you didn't take it seriously enough. But the other thing is you don't need to cave in, particularly first-time authors, you don't need to give in to every criticism that's there. I think it's really important to also say, this criticism is really helpful, I'm going to change this way, but this is, my book's trying to do this. And while I understand that reviewer number 2 would like that, that's not what I'm trying to do. And this is why I'm going to stick, in other words, give a justification that shows that you know what your book is and are very confident in both what it is and how you're going to improve it. If you can communicate that, even a bad review can turn into something really positive. So take your time, take it seriously, read the books about this, and get feedback from your colleagues on this.
Would anybody else like to jump in on the question of responding to peer reviews?
Yes, just that it's, if you look at it like you're should be grateful to hear the criticisms before publication rather than afterwards in a review. That way you have a chance to do something about it. Although I very much agree with Paul that where you feel you should stand your ground, you really should, but also need to provide justification or reasons why you see fit to stand your ground.
Yeah, and I would echo that, Jim and Paul, and I would also add that not only is it important that you take the reviews seriously and respond thoroughly, and respond also to negative reviews in such a way that, as you put it, Paul, you make clear to the board or to any other readers of your response that you understand your own project and know what it's about. But I think, Jim, what you are saying is super important, namely, you want to then not just in the response to the reviews articulate, if you say, well, here I'm standing my ground, I'm not taking this point on board, a Begründungszusammenhang, and you want to work this Begründungszusammenhang then into your manuscript. So don't just do it in order to move this whole thing through the board and then get a contract. Don't just say you will do this, but rather, if reviewer number 2, as you put it, Paul, points out, oh, this could have been done differently, but you don't want to do it differently, and still reviewer 2 harped on it, then you need to explain this better in your manuscript. That's the conclusion you draw. You go back and as you put it, Jim, you stand your ground. You can do that, but give the Begründungszusammenhang, make it glasklar.
I wanted to just raise one issue that I think often when you get a review, there's kind of a visceral response to that. There's a kind of, because all of our writing is personal, we take it personally. So I think it's really important to kind of just take a breath and be able to kind of look at that criticism and step back from it and realize that that advice isn't diminishing your own writing. It's just helping you to improve it. Take some time. I always when I send a report to someone, I say, take your time to read it, digest it, think about it, and then write a response to that report. So it's hard not to take it personally, but try to kind of separate yourself out from that sort of personal, visceral reaction that you might have.
Yeah, I think that's super important.
Fantastic. So it is, I see it's about 1:15 right now. And we do want to leave time now for questions from the audience. And if you haven't had a chance yet to type a question to the chat, you are absolutely welcome and encouraged to do so. Perhaps we'll start with Bill Carter's question as to manuscript length. Is the 80 to 120,000 word length that Paul, you referenced, is that still the industry standard for a manuscript, or is less now more? Anybody, any of the five of you who'd care to respond to that?
I mean, in our case, probably a little bit less is more. I think we tend more towards the 80 to 100,000. 120 now would be the absolute max. 120, but we usually, once we're getting in that area, particularly since we know revisions will often lengthen the manuscript and not shorten it, we put pressure to bring it down closer to 120, 110, 100. So we're looking more in the 80 to 100, max 110 range. 120 is really pushing the limit. That's where, I forget if it was Laurel who said, that's where publishers start, or Myrto, publishers start to get a little bit nervous about price point then. And costs, that it's really not worth it, I would say. Not in our field. History books are a little bit different, but in German studies, it tends to be different. But it might be different at different presses, so I'd love to hear what other people have to say.
It is actually quite different at the Gruyter in the sense that there is no upper limit, but obviously the number of pages or the word count has to be commensurate to the type of book you're writing. So for monographs, I'd say that's kind of the ballpark. Edited volumes can be longer than that. Reference works can obviously be longer than that. Even monographs can exceed that word count. It's just unlikely, or rather it makes me a little bit nervous when first monographs, so based on dissertations, are 500 pages long, because I start wondering about whether the author is able to kind of succinctly get their point across. But with someone who's pitching their second or their third book, I don't think we'd be very strict about the length, so long as it's communicated realistically from the beginning. So if you promise a 200-page book and deliver a 500-page book, that gets problematic for the reasons we discussed.
Thank you both. There was a question also in the chat from Alam Hassan. I think she's left, but I want to go ahead and ask it, and I will follow up with her. What percentage or amount of a student's dissertation content would they be able to have previously published as journal articles or other publications and still be able to publish their full dissertation as a book manuscript with the press? Is there a consensus or guideline?
I would say I think what might be most important is to find out from your department what the restrictions are, because if you're going to be getting credit for these publications for your tenure, for example, you're going to want to find out exactly what percentage of that book can have been published before. My understanding is it's about 30% in the US usually, so you shouldn't have published, so you can publish up to 30%, but that may vary within different national contexts and different universities. So it's a good idea, I think, to find out what your university requires.
30% is what I've heard as well. Sorry.
Yeah, I from my standpoint, from Camden House standpoint, it's used to be similar, but now I think it's a little bit less. I would say. I mean, I know that Laurel was talking about what's acceptable for even tenure purposes, but from our standpoint, the problem is discoverability with ebooks and articles being available online, and librarians and others that make decisions on purchasing books.
Jim, can I interrupt you for just 1 second? I think your line is breaking up a little bit, at least on my end. And I'm wondering if you could maybe briefly post it sounded like you were saying something that was really important and really interesting. If you could post that in the chat, if you're able, that would be fantastic. But we can also come back to you maybe, and your line will be a little bit better.
I can follow up on Jim, because
Yeah.
what he was getting at is that actually I think he was saying it might be a little, for Camden House, it might be a little bit less. And I've heard at the Society for Humanities, which is what I direct, so I'm dealing with all different departments in the humanities. It's anywhere from 30 down to 10% in different fields. And so in general, my advice, presses aren't that key, because of the discoverability of articles. Presses aren't that keen of doing books that have multiple chapters based upon previously released articles. And so I would often say, and this is not just, unless you're super famous, this is not just the first book, this is for anybody's book. If you have a 4-chapter book, one of them as previous 25% as previously appeared in some form is fine. Once you get to 2 of those chapters previously been out there, it starts to get a little bit uncomfortable. So that would be but my advice is don't, in general, whatever. I mean, as far as CVs as well, when I do tenure reviews and I see like all the articles appeared as articles and are part of the book, that's not showing a great deal of breadth anyway. So I think it's to your advantage not to be double dipping that much. Get 1 or 2 things out there to show like, hey, this is my topic, then work on the book and get the book out there as the final version of it. But the kind of, I really think 1 chapter max often would be my sense.
Another reason why this is good advice is because if you want to republish anything in your monograph that you've already published elsewhere, you'd have to secure the rights for that as well, unless you know for sure that you have permission to republish wherever you want. You need to check with the publisher that originally published your piece whether you're allowed to reprint it in your own work. It's strange, but this is how it works.
We have one more question here from Peter. And I apologize, Peter Ogoniran, and apologies for my pronunciation. Does it matter what citation style I use? Can I use endnotes and bibliography, or do I have to only use endnotes when citing?
Well, there will usually be a house style or a series style, and you could ask any acquisitions or series editor, and they would share the style sheet with you. So prior to preparing the manuscript that goes into copy editing, you should have followed that style. But of course you can't, especially if you shop your prospectus around to different presses or talk to different presses, you can't know in advance. So your manuscript at first is going to be in whatever style. And so if a press agrees to send the manuscript out to review because they are interested, and then the reviews are positive and the response to the review and everything is in order, then you would once again prepare the manuscript that goes into copy editing in the house style or series style.
Exactly. And I think it's important when you're first kind of shopping the sample chapter or sample introduction, I personally feel I would not want you wasting a ton of time changing that each time you submit it to a different press. Don't worry about it. That once you have a sense this is going somewhere, yes, we want the full manuscript, or yes, we're going to do it, then you put it into house style. Up until then, don't be wasting your time changing it every time for each press.
Excellent. Any further questions that folks would like to put in the chat? Now is your opportunity. Everything you always wanted to know about book publishing, but were too afraid to ask. You can see that we have a group of very, very approachable editors, acquisition editors, publishers here, and this is a great opportunity to get a question out, both for yourself, but also to others could benefit from. Paul, yeah.
One thing that just hit me when you said that, and it goes back to the contracting, which is actually not my area, but it came up just recently with one of our books. This is where like images and stuff matter, and what type of rights you have. If you are going to, our books, so one of the good things about Signale books is after 4 years, we take down the paywall, and basically your book is out there to be, it's open access, and it's open access on JSTOR, Project Muse, all different Kindle, whatever you want. So it's widely available, so it's a great thing. But if you don't have image rights, that's where things can get complicated. So you want to be sure if you're doing images, and this is where translations, we haven't done it with translations yet because the rights are different for translation, but for monographs, we do it. But that's where you want to be sure that you get the image rights down and make sure that it would be available, that those rights would apply for an open access. So those are things to think about in that phase, and how many images you have and what types of rights you secure, because it may prevent the discoverability of your book if and when it goes to open access.
So just another word about the question, Peter, that you just posted about copyright for images. So like building on what Paul said. So let's say you want to reproduce a painting in your book. You need to figure out who holds the rights, and there is usually at least 2 rights holders. The painting will be in a museum, and there are some museums, let's say the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, that make particular images available open access, so you are allowed to cite it. You can look this up in their databases, and it will tell you whether you are allowed to use that image or not. But in many instances, you can't just go ahead and use that Rembrandt painting, because A, you have to pay the museum, and B, you have to pay the photographer who took the image of the painting, right? Or there are some cases that I can now think of where an artist who lived in the 20th century has, even though they are deceased, maybe has a trust, and this trust holds the right to those images. And then there's also, in addition, a photographer. So you always have to figure out who holds these rights. And if it's a magazine from the 19th century, as you are asking, more often than not, it will be in the public domain. You can figure that out also via Wikisource. And I'm sure this is the case for all the presses represented here. But if you say, oh, this is in the public domain, you need to give us the proof, right? You really need to fill out the paperwork, because the press doesn't want to be in a position where we print some image and then it turns out, oh no, this was indeed not in the public domain and somebody owns the rights. So, but you can find that out. Even Wikisource is a good place to start for images and so forth. So, and any production editor, anybody who manages or oversees the production process could help you with this.
That's great. Thank you so much for that guidance. There are a few more questions that have popped up. One from Heidi Schliphake is that She's asking, are there any thoughts about book trends in our field in light of the reduction of German language programs in North America, i.e. books becoming more comparative, accessible to people outside the field, making sure quotes are in translation, etc.?
Well, I think that would differ from press to press, or maybe even from series to series. In our series, we really want both the German original from whatever literary or philosophical texts were produced and the English translation. So, because I don't know, if you are a Kafka scholar, likely you would prefer really to read the text in the original. But if you are coming at a volume on Kafka from the comparative literature or English department perspective, you also might need the translation. And sometimes we have books that are in comparative literature. Let's say we recently had a book that utilized German language literature, English language literature, and Italian language literature. And because Italian was featured so prominently, we said, well, please also give the original Italian, because we really wanted it sort of to be philologisch nachvollziehbar, what happens there. But that really differs. And some people balk at having to give both the German original of a literary text and the English translation, because it, of course, ups the word count. And we still get people who want the 120 words and push against that ceiling. So yeah, but you ought to find out about these types of things before you estimate what your word count is going to be.
Jim, you want to go on that?
Let's see. No, you go ahead.
I mean, just to Heidi's really excellent question, I would kind of strangely say that the trend goes both ways at this time. I think in general, I mean, I'm also in comparative literature. I would like to see German studies actually be more expansive in reaching out. I think it's more intellectually honest that way than this kind of sense of only German language. So I'm very open to that type of book, and I think that's a good idea as far as increasing our audience. I also think it is shaping the way we need to go. But on the other hand, as someone who wrote his dissertation on Jean-Paul and wrote presses that said, who is this guy? You can't publish this. Well, you gotta be kidding me. He's not even translated. The thing I'm happy about Signale is that we can do it so that you can write the super nerdy book on a completely unknown German author, and I'm more than willing to do it because it's a good book. And I think we want that research as well. I don't just want, as someone who knows 18th, 19th century, I just don't want presentist typical authors from the 20th century. So I'm very open to both and trying to kind of, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think both are really important.
I love this question too, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot over the time that I've been at Peter Lang. It's been really consistent in terms of the number of books that we're publishing in German studies every year, and that's such a wonderful sign, I think, of like the vibrancy of the field. But I do find that a lot of scholars are more interested in publishing in series that aren't necessarily German studies series. They're interested in publishing in a series that's maybe a memory studies series or a disability studies series or medical humanities or something like that. So a lot of my program has developed in those directions so that all of the series are welcoming scholars working across multiple languages, but we have Germanists who are publishing within those series. So that's a sort of a trend that I've certainly noticed.
That's definitely true of our list as well. This is definitely the direction it's going in. And I'd say that predates the recent developments in a lot of language programs in North America. And yeah, as you've all said, it's not necessarily the way that this affects, this kind of translates into the publishing world is not necessarily a negative development, even though obviously the closing down of departments or the merging of modern languages departments is a huge loss. The increasing interdisciplinarity of series in these fields is actually, I think, an enrichment.
Beautiful. I want to briefly, we're already past half past the hour, and I also want to acknowledge the fact that two of our panelists are on this call from Europe, and it's quite late your time. But the questions asked by Mary and Lauren, let me just maybe put this out there, but if anybody wants to address them, feel free to address them. There is a resources link that we posted, and I would imagine that these two questions are excellent questions that that you could probably find good answers to in Bill Germano's books or some of the other books that are posted there. But I do also want to give any of the panelists, if anybody does want to address either of these two questions, give you the chance to do so.
Well, just very quickly, don't stress about the title. The title should, of
Very
course,
good.
communicate
So
something.
I hope
Yeah.
I hope Mary and Lauren, that those resources are going to be helpful to you. And let me
Elliott,
say for yeah, go ahead.
Imke had something that she wanted to say. I don't know if you couldn't hear her, maybe?
Oh, go ahead, Imke.
Oh, no, it doesn't matter. I just wanted to say, don't stress about the title, because your series editor will figure out the title in the end with you, because the title should actually be something where the subject matter is not completely hidden in a subtitle. It needs to sort of stick out in a library acquisition catalog, right? And it should also be probably a catchier, snazzier title, but we can help you with that. All of us here would be able to help you with this type of thing. And most book titles get changed in the process, and it's a give and take between the author and the series editor and the acquisitions editor and the press. So don't even spend a second stressing about that.
Excellent. On behalf of German Quarterly, on behalf of all of the folks at AATG, thank you once again to our five panelists for sharing their very, very deep knowledge and their reflections. I do want to mention before we sign off once again that Hester Baer and Karin Schuttier, the editors of German Quarterly, are planning on hosting a further roundtable, a second, a follow-up to their roundtable on challenges facing the discipline and potential solutions to those challenges, of which, as I think we've heard tonight, the book publishing business is a key part. And once again, thank you guys all so much, the panelists and audience members alike, and good night to everybody.
Thank you.
The panelists.